All right, today we're going to dive into what to plan for once this bull run might be over. Is the bear cycle going to be a little different this time around? And if it is, what does that mean to you when you look at your investments and also kind of your future? My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to Tech Path. Joining me today is Mr. Mark Moss. Great to have you on the show again, Mark.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, we always love your insights on kind of where this future is going, especially around the monetary side of things. Mark, let's just kind of jump into it a little bit. First of all, if you guys have not checked out Mark's channel, you've got to just search Mark Moss on YouTube. You will find a treasure of information and great episodes on what Mark is doing over there. So congrats to what you guys are doing over there. Mark, let's get into the current bull run. What are your insights right now? Bitcoin, of course, is on fly. We see altcoins just absolutely starting to unhook. Where are your thoughts in terms of how this is going to play out?
So, I've never been one to try to do short-term predictions. I like longer-term predictions, especially when you're dealing with a brand new technology. And Bitcoin isn't just a new technology. It's what I call a technological revolution. The difference is a technology is like an iPhone. A technological revolution is something that changes the way the world works, changes humanity. Industrial revolution, steam engines and steel, electricity, oil, automobiles, microprocessors, all changed the world, and here we are. When you're looking at those, you're looking for two main things, really. And so one is growth of the networks. That's Metcalfe's law, right? The more the network grows exponentially, the more it's worth. The second thing you're looking for is development happening on the network. And so both those things are happening at a tremendous rate, which of course is pushing the valuation higher. When you look at if you're trying to kind of navigate these bear and bull market cycles, typically we've seen Bitcoin work off of like a 4-year halving cycle. So every 4 years, the new incoming supply, the inflation rate gets cut in half, which happened in May of 2020. What we've seen historically is that about 18 months after that halving cycle, which puts it somewhere here around at the end of the year, we've seen kind of the top of that market cycle. Now, will that continue to play out? We don't have enough of them in history to be conclusive. And so we don't know. But per Michael Saylor, he says all the models are destroyed. We have, Dan Held talking about a super cycle. And so I think we're seeing some things happening right now that could completely change that. So obviously, well, one of the big things, and this is a really big one, if you look at a new technology, you'll see something called the diffusion of innovation. And it's like this upside down bell curve. And so basically you have the inventors, the visionaries. Then there's like this chasm. It's called the chasm. And then you have the early majority, late majority, the laggards. And the chasm sits at around an 18% adoption rate. And the thing with the chasm is before the early majority jumps in, is you have to have this mental shift. And that's why the chasm is there. The visionaries obviously have the vision, but the early majority don't. And so the early majority think it's just going to become illegal. It'll never work. It's too volatile. They have all these things. And so there has to be a mental shift in order to cross the chasm and get to the early majority where things blow up. And I'm arguing that we are in that chasm right now. And there's a couple events that are happening right now in real time that are going to push us over the chasm. One being the Bitcoin ETF that just passed last week. And so what that does is it transforms the perception. Right now, all of a sudden, people are like, well, dang, I guess the U.S. ain't going to make it illegal. Plus, we saw Gary Gensler from the SEC and Fed Chair Jerome Powell both come out in the last couple of weeks and say, we will not ban it. So they said it. And I think this ETF changes that perception, pushes us over the chasm. In addition, of course, companies like MicroStrategy and then nations like El Salvador coming in. So I think, and then you add in the fact that the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, and all the other central banks cannot stop printing trillions of dollars. I think this thing could go much further and higher than most people anticipate.
Yeah, I think when we look at, just experts around the world that have been on this show, and they're kind of going in the same direction that Saylor is going, in the sense that all the models that we've seen up to now have been completely, somewhat destroyed, in the sense of if you're trying to utilize patterns, to try to identify what the future is going to hold. And I think that's going to be the scenario that we'll face in this particular bear cycle, which will change maybe when that bear cycle actually occurs. And whether you look at Raoul Paul or you look at some people we've had, Alex Mashinsky over at Celsius, he's been pushing into like second quarter of next year, all those kind of things. But at some point we will see a little bit of a correction And at the same time, we've got other things happening right now, obviously with Fed printing. Let's talk about that
Yep.
because the printing cycle or machine here that we have in the United States is obviously just continuously breaking all-time records on just how much fiat is being printed. Where do you see this ending, and will it end? At some point, it's got to.
Yeah, so that's a perfect thing to talk about, especially coming out of the discussion on the Bitcoin cycle, because yes, you're right. Per history, maybe we should peak out the end of the year, first part of next year. Many analysts, as you said, have kind of pushed it back to Q2 maybe of next year. It's anybody's guess, but
Mhm.
um, going back to the Fed, going back to the central banks creating so much money, creating inflation, monetary inflation. We've also pushed the bull market of the stock market continue, higher and higher than it should ever
Exactly.
have gone. As a matter of
Yep.
fact, we're many years into a record. Like it should have crashed years ago based off of historical timeframes. And so this monetary expansion that we've been seeing from the Federal Reserve is changing the model of the stock markets. And of course, why wouldn't it continue to change the model of Bitcoin? I think the thing is that there's this debate raging today. Jack Dorsey from the CEO of Twitter
Mhm.
tweeted out, I think over the weekend, he said hyperinflation is going to change everything. It's happening. And boy, did that kick up a hornet's nest. He got every economist from Paul Krugman and Peter Schiff, and even got Janet Yellen coming out talking in response to that. Of course, Bloomberg, Wall Street have all come out and come out talking about that. But I think, well, staying on topic with the Fed, they are printing an enormous amount of money. They are doing what's monetary expansion. If you look at the M1 or the M2 money supply, they've
Mhm.
increased the monetary supply by 30% over the last year. Now, Milton Friedman says that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. It's always that. So while the Fed wants to deflect and say, it's supply chain, no, it's always a monetary expansion. Now, will this continue? Well, let's take a look at that. So we can see right now the Biden admin is still trying to find funding for this $1 trillion bill, then a $3.5 trillion bill. They're talking about bringing it down to $2.5 trillion. We can see now they're talking about, just over the weekend, Janet Yellen's talking about, and Pelosi now, taxing unrealized gains. The government has a spending problem. They
Mhm.
can't stop spending, and there's not enough income coming in. So if they've increased the monetary supply by 30% over the last year, will that continue? My guess, most of people that I talk to guess yes, it's going to continue. We'll continue to see the monetary supply continue to expand by 25% a year, maybe for the next couple of years, which is inflation. The monetary supply inflates, the prices go up. And so I think the Fed is caught between a rock and a hard place. They are talking about maybe tapering, pumping less money into the market. Right now it's 120 billion a month. They want to bring that number down. They talk about raising rates. I don't believe they can do either of those in a meaningful way.
Right. I think that's the question is with that kind of scenario where you've got hyperinflation, which you mentioned with what Dorsey is saying, that really starts to change the dynamic of how high net worth individuals are going to be looking at how they're securing wealth over time, especially over the next maybe 2 to 3 years. And a lot of that will cycle in this round where we're starting to see kind of the
Exactly.
mainstreamification of what's happening in crypto become reality, like you mentioned, the chasm of adoption all aligned. It seems like there's a lot of very interesting things happening at the same time, almost a perfect storm. When you see that, is there anything that you are concerned about? Because that anytime I see perfect storms starting to align, I start getting a little very interested in where this might flow because people do crazy things in these perfect storms. Any potential insight
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, there's a lot that I'm worried about. There's a lot that I'm worried about. So this monetary expansion, this inflation is what happens is money at the end of the day is communication. It communicates a signal. The price is a signal, and that tells people one, hey, prices went up on these things. I should buy less of those things, and it also tells manufacturers we should make more of those things. And so then the market can coordinate what we need. When you dump in $8 trillion, it distorts the price signal, and the market can no longer coordinate properly, which is why we're seeing shortages of everything. And top of that, we have policy that's been put into place. Literally, the governments are putting policies into place that are even causing this to be worse and worse. So throughout Europe, we've seen natural gas up 800%, electricity up 400%. I would consider that hyperinflation.
Yeah.
We see now that the lack of natural gas is leading to a lack of fertilizer. What do we need fertilizer for? Oh yeah, to grow food. That's a problem. It's also used to make CO2, which is used for what? Oh yeah, to make food. That's a problem. In the United States, we see the same thing. Our supply chains are breaking down. We see farmers are reporting that even if they ordered parts and new equipment for their farms today, best case scenario, they'd see that by spring of 2023. If
Hmm.
that is delayed a little bit by a couple of weeks, they miss their spring plant. That pushes food back to 2024. That's 3 years from now. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems. We've seen schools reporting in Denver. They can't even get cartons for the milk to get the food
Yeah.
and the milk to the schools. And so we're seeing this happening right now. And I think, is there cause for concern? Yes, they're going to continue to print this money. It's going to continue to distort the markets. We're going to continue to see supply chains breaking down. And even if a magic wand came in right now and just fixed the situation, this is going to take time to work out.
Yeah, so definitely supply chain has been, I think a lot of people are looking at it kind of as to your point, kind of blaming supply chain. Obviously, the hiccup we had in China over the lockdowns. Now we've seen, various countries around the world start to really see the kind of the dynamic impact of what's happening here within the US in terms of what is still to believe a balloon market or a bubble, whether you look at real estate, any of the real interesting asset classes, obviously stocks and bonds, et cetera. Bitcoin obviously following along in that line. And with all of this kind of funneling in from an aspect of either inflation, hyperinflation, or deflation, some people talk deflation, some people talk hyperinflation, like what Dorsey has mentioned. Um, with hyperinflation, how does that really, or could it really affect Bitcoin and I should say cryptocurrency in general? What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
how that transition might occur?
Yeah. So what happens with inflation, and then of course hyperinflation? What happens with inflation is people realize their money is not buying enough goods and services. I would
Hmm.
argue in the United States, people already see that. I better buy a house right now because it's going to be more expensive in the future. I better buy that car today. It's going to be more in the future. What they're actually saying, they don't quite realize it yet, is that they better spend their dollars because they're going to be worth less in the future. Now, what happens when you see inflation is people start realizing this and they start trying to get rid of those dollars as fast as they can. Of course,
Hmm.
the more that inflation goes up into hyperinflation, the more urgent that becomes. So at 5%, people aren't that concerned. At 20%, people are really concerned. At 100%, they can't get rid of those dollars fast enough. Now, when that happens, what a nation does all the time, 100% of the time, they impose something called capital controls. So they try to
Right.
squeeze the capital to make sure people can't get out. There's no safety boat. There's no release valve. Well, Bitcoin has now provided that safety boat, that release valve. It's the best release valve we've ever seen. And so I believe that will only speed it up. So the faster that people leave that currency, the faster it continues to inflate. And so now, because Bitcoin has given that perfect opportunity, I think more people will go. I think we'll see this in this from inflation to hyperinflation phenomenon happen much faster than people would ever imagine. And I think Bitcoin will be the primary beneficiary of that. It already is. I mean, we're already seeing
Yeah.
that. And so people talk about inflation like it has to be 50%. Paul Krugman says it's not certified hyperinflation unless it's 50%, year after year. But it depends on what you're pricing things in, because if you're
Exactly.
pricing things, remember, everything has a denominator. So it's the asset for priced in dollars, priced in oil, priced in gold, or priced in Bitcoin. If you price goods in Bitcoin, we're already seeing hyperinflation.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be a factor that will continue to, and to your point, the potential here for a speed in which we've never seen before, especially here in the U.S., because really we've never seen it really since the 1980s, I think was the last time we
Yeah.
saw inflation
There's also
at,
one other factor that
yeah,
I think is important, and that's the internet. It's
yeah,
you and I doing what we're doing right now. And so we're getting information out faster to people,
yeah,
not just that there's a problem, there's a bigger problem coming, but also that
hmm,
there's a solution. So not only is there a solution, Bitcoin is going to accelerate that, but the internet, this moving information around rapidly and providing that solution at the same time is going to dramatically accelerate this.
yeah. Mark, when you think about that, I mean, because I'm just thinking, super inflation, we saw 20% in 1980. We saw kind of the evolution. Obviously, we didn't have some of the tool sets in place. We definitely didn't have Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Where you see this happening today, especially in the world stage for the dollar being the reserve monetary fund of the entire planet, You see what's happening in China with the digital yuan. Do you feel like we'll be down to maybe 2 or 3 currencies? Because we're starting to see more and more currencies drop from different
Yeah.
countries. And obviously,
Yeah.
Bitcoin could be an alternative along with other cryptocurrencies. What are your thoughts on where that ecosystem might go?
Yeah, so one of my good friends, Brent Johnson, he has this dollar milkshake theory. He's going to be speaking at the Market Disruptors live event next month. But he has this dollar milkshake theory, which he says the dollar will suck up all the liquidity of all the other fiat currencies in the world.
Hmm.
So, kind of to your point, will they all start dying off, and we'll start to see 1 or 2 emerge? I think that's probably the case. We're seeing other fiat currencies blowing up like crazy right now.
Right.
Lebanon, Iran, of course, Venezuela, Argentina, etc. And so they'll continue to blow up, and people will probably be forced to go back to the dollar. Maybe they'll go to the yuan. I kind of doubt that. I think there's a severe lack of trust of anything that comes out of
Hmm.
China. You know, they obviously are not very transparent with their data. So I would say the dollar will continue to be the big beneficiary of that, which is why someone like Brent or other people would argue that the dollar isn't seeing hyperinflation. Well, when you compare it to other currencies, when you compare it to
Right.
other assets, it's a different picture. But I
Yeah.
do think, to your point, I think the dollar will probably continue to strengthen compared to other currencies. As those currencies blow up, like I said, we're seeing it all over the place.
How do you see the Fed transitioning? Because at some point, we're going to see a Fed transition, whether they go away from the traditional fiat system into some sort of digital currency. When or do you see that happening in the near future?
Well, it's happening. It's happening right now in front of us, and it's something that it's not, in my opinion, it's not a good maneuver. And so,
Yeah.
what do I mean by that? Well, we know that just recently we've seen Jen Psaki and Biden both coming out saying that Biden, quote, wants to make a fundamental change in our economy. A
Hmm.
fundamental change. We heard that word before. That was Obama talking about that fundamental change. That's a problem. We've seen even something that I think is even a bigger problem, where Biden wants to bring in Saul Amarova in to
Hmm.
run the OCC, the comptroller of the currency, to control the currency.
Right.
She was born in the Soviet Union. She's not American. She was born in the Soviet Union, graduated from Moscow State University. She's a Lenin Personal Academic Scholarship. She's a communist. So they want to
Mhm.
make a fundamental shift to the economy. He's trying to bring in an actual Russian communist to run the currency. And so, to your point, yes, there is this fundamental shift happening. They want to command the economy, no longer allow the economy or the currency to be free. They want to command it. And history shows, I won't say in my opinion, history shows us that whenever a nation does that, it spells disaster very, very quickly.
Right. Yeah, a big time scenario there. And if that actually comes to light in terms of how the Fed might shift and how we use the monetary system, obviously the central banks are going to have somewhat of an effect on the rest of the world, including the United States. Do you see a central bank going into a digital currency asset model to where they're essentially replacing what we know as the banking system today?
I do, and I think over a long enough period of time, their goal is actually even much scarier. So, you've mentioned obviously the Chinese digital yuan, their digital currency. The Federal Reserve is trying to roll out their digital currency. All the central banks are trying to roll out their digital currencies. I think the way that money works, the banking system works, is the Federal Reserve creates a reserve on the commercial banks, and you have like your local banks. They create a reserve on their account, and then the banks lend that money into existence by giving you an auto loan, an RV loan, a house loan, et cetera.
Right.
But there's like this decentralized method to that, where I can go down the street to my local bank and he can make a local decision based off local information. But I think what the central banks will do, the Federal Reserve, if they give us a digital currency, we could have an account directly with the Fed, and they would compress the
Hmm.
stack. So instead of having this decentralized banking thing a little bit, where I can still kind of have this local relationship, that would go away. But it could even be on a bigger level. So, for example, above the central banks, we have the IMF, which is kind
Hmm.
of the central bank above the central banks, or maybe the BIS as well. And the IMF has this SDR, which is their own currency, which is a basket made up of all other fiat currencies, kind of like what Facebook Libra tried to do. And I believe the IMF will want to have that SDR be a digital currency
Mm.
that you and I could end up having directly with the IMF, and we could compress the entire banking stack, getting rid of the nation's central banks. Of course, as we just talked about, they're blowing up one by one. Get rid of the
Right.
nation's central banks, get rid of the commercial banks, get rid of the local banks, and literally compress the whole stack. And we'll see the world taken over by bankers.
Yeah, that would be a complete, well, because you would essentially have a digital wallet that's tied to everything that could either be turned off, turned on, based
Yeah.
on all sorts of different scenarios. I mean, you've got China, in China, you've got the social score aspect of what they're doing, which essentially is going to be connected to the digital yuan, the CNY,
Yeah.
at some point. So this is starting to get a little bit dystopian here when you think about these kinds of moves being played out
Yeah.
in front of us. Is the safe haven cryptocurrency and or what we're seeing in Bitcoin around the world going to be safe from this kind of scenario, or do you think it's going to be enveloped by the machine?
No, I think if you talk about the safest places, obviously there's probably a scale there, but I would say Bitcoin is the safest place to go. Obviously, real estate has been one of the best places to hold wealth for the last 100 years or longer. The problem is when you have to escape an oppressive regime, like we've seen, the United States used to be the recipient of all those people.
Hmm.
You can't take real estate with you. You can't get your
Right.
money out of the bank. You can't carry your big things of gold either. And so Bitcoin is portable. So that's one good thing about it. It's digital, costs no money to secure it. It cannot be taken. It can't be seized. It can't be censored. So if I want to send it to you, it can't be stopped, blocked, or prevented. So
Yeah.
in regards to the point that you just made, I believe it is the safest alternative. I think most people have realized that by now, which is why we see nation states going to it. Of course, El Salvador has had a massive success with it over the last couple of months in the sense that, one, their rollout not without bugs, but it's had massive adoption. Anybody that's been got gifted Bitcoin and the nation itself has seen it double in value. Now there's 5 other nations that are trying to jump on board. So to your point, yeah, I think it's the safest place to go. It allows us to move around if we need to, take our wealth with us in a way that can't be stolen or censored or manipulated away.
Mark, okay, so that tells me that we've got some security here. Obviously, we are in that early stage adoption, if maybe not even really at that point. Do you feel like we're going to see another, say, 2 to 5 years of general adoption, at least here in the United States and abroad, of what's happening in the cryptocurrency market? And if we did see that, the impact on that in terms of the market, especially Bitcoin price. Many people are pointing, including someone like a Kathy Wood, pointing to 500,000 or greater, $500,000 Bitcoin, which could happen within the next 5 years. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
where that might push this?
Yeah, so earlier I talked about when you're looking at new technology, you're trying to really look at the growth of the network and the development of the network. There's another tool that's very useful to kind of measure this growth. It's called an S-curve analysis. And so
Mhm.
an S-curve is kind of like an S laid down where you kind of have the flat vertical S, it goes up, and then it kind of goes across the top to the right. And when you use an S-curve, basically the way it works is the time that a new technology takes to go from 0 to 10% adoption is typically the time it takes to go from 10 to 90% adoption. So we
Right.
can see that Bitcoin, it's open, right? It's open source. We can see that through on-chain analytics that we got to probably about a 10% adoption rate, meaning 10% of the people were using Bitcoin in about 10 years. So based off of that, that tells us that we should get to 90% adoption in the next 10 years, which
Mhm.
puts us right around 2029. So probably over the next 8 years, we're probably at about 18%, 20% adoption today. We could say go from 20% to 90% over the next 8 years, which is basically a parabolic run. I
Right.
believe S-curve analysis is pretty good. I believe that probably holds true with Bitcoin. And so I think over the next 8 years, we're just going to see it go up like a hockey stick. Does that mean it goes up in a straight line? Of course not. Nothing goes up or down in a straight line. Even if you look at Germany's hyperinflation period, where like a loaf of bread went from 12 cents to $1 billion, even if you were trying to trade that, it was still volatile as it went up that fast. But I
Right.
think that's what we have, in store for us. I think Bitcoin gets to 90% adoption by the end of the decade, and that's going to be a tremendous run. To Kathy Wood's claim of 500,000 in 5 years, I think that's totally doable. I think Bitcoin can go above $1 million and higher. And it's easy to see that. I mean, if you're evaluating a new technology like Uber, you would go, well, it's going to disrupt the taxi industry, the limo industry, the van rideshare industry. If it can capture 5% of each of those, and so we'd look at the same with Bitcoin. Well, there's 40 trillion sitting in offshore bank accounts. It can easily take that. 13 trillion in gold, easily take that. What about the $300 trillion parked in, real estate and stock markets? Can easily grab a piece of that. So I think seeing Bitcoin up to $1 million a coin is not unrealistic at all, as long as you're willing to wait, a few years.
Yeah. Well, and many people are looking to gold as kind of the next incumbent in the sense of Bitcoin overtaking it in terms of market cap, which is really not that far away. I mean, if you look at where we are, sure, it's 10% of where gold's market cap at 11 trillion right now is, and that could be attainable within, who knows, within the next, maybe right at the next halving, which would be in
Yeah.
what is about 3 years away. All right, so Mark, when you look at, now we've got, let's kind of put our crystal ball in place. We're 3 years in, Bitcoin's maybe somewhere around 250, 300K. People have really transitioned into crypto, utilizing it for a lot more things. How do you secure this in the sense that you've pretty much moved away from the fiat system? We'll call it the early adopters, guys like you, myself, moving away from the fiat system, only keeping fiat for literally more utilitarian use cases. How do
Right.
you see that playing out in the future for the transaction side of things? Because at some point we've got to be able to do that. I mean, I know many people will look at Michael Saylor and just say, hey, just loan money against your Bitcoin and just you'd live off that forever. But at some point, this is going to have to become sort of utility in terms of a transacting point. Do you see other cryptocurrencies, other projects that would be splitting off of Bitcoin, much like where you'd be just transferring Bitcoin into other projects to handle transactions? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think what a lot of people don't understand, and I actually read an article this morning from Bloomberg, and they said cryptocurrencies failed as currency. They need more regulation. It was a crazy article this morning. But I think what happens is people don't realize that there's like an evolution process, and so like they're in the forest looking at an oak tree that just sprouted and saying, "Oh, that's never going to be a big oak tree," and it's like. It literally just sprouted. Give it some time. And I think so. There's this evolution of money where really, if you look at what money is, it's a recognized good, right? People understand it. We went from barter to now using a medium of
Right.
exchange. So it starts as like a collectible. So like, hey, this is pretty cool. Let's collect it. Eventually, enough people collect it where it becomes like a store of value. So we see the wealthy storing value in cars and art and things like that. And then it gets big enough where then it can become a medium of exchange. And then eventually a unit of account. And so they're saying Bitcoin can't be a medium of exchange can't be a medium exchange. Well, it just hasn't evolved to that level yet. Right
Mhm.
now, it went from the collectible and it's just getting to this really recognized store of value stage. Eventually becomes the medium of exchange. Now, as far as actually being used that way, I've been down in El Salvador. I was there,
Yeah.
right? I used the Lightning Network to buy my coffee in the morning and buy my water from the bodega and even at the pupusa stand to get a little pupusa. And literally they punch it into their point of sale system, their water, their coffee. They flip the thing around. It has a barcode. I open up my app like Venmo or PayPal. I scanned it. It showed the amount. I hit send. And literally as fast as I hit the button, they had received the money, like literally that fast. And so it's already being done. I think El Salvador reported last month, a couple weeks ago, they said, I think it was like $3.5 million was sent in remittances that day alone.
Right.
And so it's already being done. It's already happening. Now, to your point, right now, I want to spend my fiat that's losing value, and I want to save in Bitcoin that's going up
Mhm.
in value. So at some point, I think there's going to be a long transition. I'm not saying that fiat's going away tomorrow. It's probably not
Sure.
going away even in 10 years. But I think we'll want to continue to save in a currency that's going up or an asset that's going up and then spend that deflating currency. But I think to the point, I mean, you can literally use Bitcoin today for that medium of exchange if you want.
Yeah. Last point before we let you go, Mark, is obviously we've seen the success in El Salvador. Obviously, I'm sure there's been some rocky roads, but essentially they did what they wanted to try to do, which was essentially supplant it as a currency. It's been done. Is there any major G20 or G8 that you think would potentially go in this direction?
Well, G20 gets a little bit harder, obviously, so it's probably going to stick down in those smaller countries for now. So we're seeing it. I mean, Brazil was talking about it. It seems like it kind
Right.
of lost some steam there. But one of the most interesting developments that I think is China kicked all the Bitcoin miners out of the country. The U.S. became the biggest beneficiary of that. Now the United States is now the largest country for Bitcoin mining, controls over a third of the network, and most of that is down in Texas. And Texas, Ted Cruz, Governor Abbott are now saying they want to make Bitcoin a legal tender in the state of Texas.
Interesting.
And so while that's not a nationwide thing, we're starting to see balkanization, right? Which is basically a big nation state breaking apart into small states. We're starting to see multiple states filing lawsuits against the federal government. We're starting to see lots of talk about a civil war, succession, things like that. We're starting to see states like Texas wanting to adopt their own monetary policy. So I don't know about the G20 right now, but I think Texas they're going for it. They're saying it. They're doing things to do that. And that could be a bigger development than most people realize.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So bear market. Last, I promise. We got so much to talk about. But bear market. Do you feel like we'll see this mid next year, or do you think it's earlier than that?
So it depends on what you consider a bear market. All right. So I think most people would consider a bear market like the price is going down. Well, are we talking about cryptocurrencies, or are we talking about the
Yep.
markets in general?
Yeah. Crypto.
So if we're talking about crypto, I think I would probably go along with general consensus that we'll probably go into some sort of a bear market next year. I think there's a good chance we see the overall markets drop next year, and we'll probably see cryptocurrency markets drop along with those as well. So yeah, I would say I think there's probably a good chance we see that.
Very cool. Mark Moss, always good to have you on the show. Just a quick view of Mark's channel. If you guys have not seen this over on YouTube, just search out Mark Moss. Some great stuff in here. I love these topics you're hitting on there for sure, man. This is looking good. I can't wait to see and learn more about your event you're holding here in Miami. That's going to be fun. Where can people find out about it?
I'd love to just talk about that real quick. So next month we're having a live event in Miami, which of course you'll be at, hopefully, Paul. And basically what this event is for is that I believe the next couple of years are going to be very turbulent. Unfortunately, I think the next couple of years are going to continue to get worse in regards to supply chains and products and government overreach and things like that, inflation, et cetera. I do believe massive hope and prosperity is on the other side. So if we can use this time of volatility, so time of volatility is when we can, a lot of people get wiped out, but times of volatility also allow people to make a lot of money. There's a lot of opportunity. And so if you can play this correctly, I think it could be the biggest opportunity of your life, and there's massive hope and prosperity on the other side. But it's going to be dangerous. And so this event is going to be bringing about 15 of the top experts to tell you what they think is going to happen over the next couple of years, and more importantly, what to do about it in regards to making more money, protecting your assets so you don't end up owning nothing by 2030, protecting assets, plan B passports, building cash flow, and all things like that. So also, who knows if we'll be able to do live events next year. So come to Miami while you still can. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it's marketdisruptorslive.com, marketdisruptorslive.com.
Perfect. All right. Thanks again for stopping in on the show today, Mark. Great to have you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate it.
All right. All right, you guys are tuned in over on the podcast. Of course, we appreciate that. Great movement over on the Spotify podcast. We've seen just dramatic growth over there. So thanks again. If you guys want to check out great interviews and also stuff that we do in terms of our analysis, make sure and check out the YouTube channel, which is just Paul Barron Network. And of course, the easiest thing you can do is, once you get here, is join the Diamond Circle. The Diamond Circle is a place where we gather like-minded people. We hopefully give you guys some insights and some data analysis that's unique member content. We also drop back to you great things like NFTs, even cryptocurrency. So we do a lot of giving back. So you guys, of course, if you have any ideas for the show, just hit us in the comments below, or you can hit me up on Twitter @PaulBarron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.